the riot would never have happened. It's a really unbelievable thing. The excuses that were being said
We should know
today.
plenty of Black Lives Matter
In fact,
protesters have been arrested.
many more Black Lives Matter protesters have been arrested than have been arrested for what happened last week.
Yeah.
And that's a fact. So,
Good afternoon. I'm watching some of the votes come in. This is so far 5 Republicans. So the numbers that we're trying to figure out here. Good afternoon. This is the Steve Mazzacane podcast. It is 4:01 on Wednesday. And I've gone back and forth between Fox and CNN and MSNBC today watching some of this coverage. A fairly, I would say, quick impeachment hearing, just a few hours, which is, everything is just sped up so much right now. And I'm trying to watch the numbers come in because the real question is how many Republicans will vote for impeachment. Right now, it said 5 a second ago, so I don't know if somebody mistakenly voted that way. What we're hearing, reports are that it will be 7 so far. But it is amazing, as somebody who, follows this stuff and pays attention to this stuff, and those of you that are watching this likely do as well, just the historic things that are happening at such breakneck speed. And it's really amazing. So we should have another 5 or 6 minutes. We should have the final tally in 5 minutes and 40 seconds. We'll have the tally, 215 votes still to go. But in 5 minutes, President Donald Trump will be the first president in history to be impeached twice. And there's almost no likelihood of it, going further. And there's no likelihood of him being out before the election. So that's really the question here. And yes, we'll talk about impeachment and what should happen next. I said yesterday I wasn't necessarily for impeachment, and I'll explain why. We explained why yesterday. But there's something as an American that gets you choked up watching this. Like, as much as what happened Wednesday was awful, and certainly, in my opinion, Trump was to blame for it. If not 100%, then 99.9%. But this is our country. And we saw pictures today of the National Guard in the Capitol sleeping on the floor. I don't have words for this. And so I think it's safe to say that Biden is being robbed of his moment, but I don't think he cares at this point. It's just a matter of getting in there. All right, so now we're up to 5 Republicans, 4 minutes, 20 seconds left of this vote. Just absolutely historic vote. And it's still, we don't know where this will go from here. Last night we heard Mitch McConnell come out and say, no, he didn't come out and say it. It was leaked that he was for and very upset with Trump. So we don't know what direction this will take in the Senate. But, listening to many of these speeches today and hearing some of the talking points, I didn't spend too much time on the talking points, just trying to get a sense of the 5 Republicans now. I want to read Kevin McCarthy's speech today, and just some of the things that he said during this. Reading from The Hill, I listened to his speech. My jaw pretty much hit the ground, and if you understand what Kevin McCarthy has been doing, he's a Republican from California who is the minority leader in the House, been one of the most vocal Trump supporters, came out from day one and said Trump won the election, that we have to keep fighting. And he has kept up that narrative. And he comes out today and says, he's against impeachment. I'll read this in a second. I believe impeaching the president in such a short time frame would be a mistake. A vote to impeach would further divide this nation. A vote to impeach would further fan the flames of partisan division. We'll get to that. But then that does not mean the president is free from fault. The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding, which is just a massive, massive change from a massive, massive hypocrite, because he was right there with Trump for the last 2 months while Trump laid the groundwork for this and kept basically calling every Secretary of State a liar and every registrar of voters, Democrat or Republican, a liar, and they were all hiding votes, and they were all part of some mass conspiracy to keep him out. McCarthy was right there with him, and now gets up on the day of impeachment and says what he did was wrong. the president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He makes that statement. But he shouldn't be impeached. It's hard. It's hard to understand this. Good afternoon. I'm just looking at comments now. Good afternoon to everybody joining us. If you're a Democrat, clearly most of the mentality is we want retribution. We want to go after this guy. We want to make sure he can never run again. If you are a Republican, you're either in the category of, he didn't do anything wrong. He never used the exact words, which I don't agree with that, but okay. Or you're in the category of, what he did was wrong, but impeachment doesn't bring everybody together. And basically the arguments we heard all day long in this hearing was we need to come together as a nation, so let's impeach, or we need to come together as a nation, so let's not impeach. It was the same arguments, different conclusions on both sides. Right now it's 6, so 6 Republicans have voted to impeach. We're waiting on 158 remaining votes. I heard the number was going to be 7. I'm curious if it's going to be higher than that, but so far 139 Republicans have voted against it. This will pass. We know that. The question is the Republicans and how many are there. And the question was if he gets to the Senate, Mitch McConnell coming out with what he did last night and who gets behind him. It's interesting. Usually, as an elected official, you have to ask yourself a question. There's just this balance that happens. And that is, it just happens on a local level, it happens on a state level, and it happens on a national level of I represent this district and this constituency, and then there's the what I feel is best for the country, and they're not always the same thing. So are you first and foremost a representative of that constituency, or are you first and foremost someone who's supposed to do what's right for the nation and for the country? And so many, many elected officials, in good faith, have to make that decision today. And so often we look at, for example, Democrat Manchin in West Virginia, a district that has absolutely been all Trump, but Manchin is a Democrat. So he is going to be a very powerful person for years to come because he has a base that may pull him one way and ideology that may pull him a different way. That's what gives so much credibility to Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney is the third ranking Republican in the House. She represents Wyoming. So she's a Republican, came out for impeachment. It's now up to 7. So we'll see if it grows from there. No, we're up 0. So Republican lawmakers calling for impeachment. Cheney, Jamie Herrera, John Kett, he's from New York. Dan Newhouse from Washington, Herrera from Washington. Now, Washington is a Democratic state, but there are certainly Republican districts in Washington. So we have to see where they're from. So that's the question. When we're analyzing these individual votes, a Republican who stood up in a Democratic leading district, okay, that kind of makes sense. They're kind of safe. Cheney did not. It's Wyoming. That's as Republican as it gets. And I think 70 to 26% Republican in Wyoming. Cheney is a brave vote. A lot of credit to her. Fred Upton's Michigan. Michigan went Biden, but barely. Catlow is New York. Kensinger's Illinois. So for the most part, so I don't see anything that jumps out at me like Cheney. But Liz Cheney's vote to stand up against President Trump when she represents Wyoming, which 70% of the people voted for Trump, is a brave, courageous vote. No question about it. The number is 7. So it is passed. Close vote, but they only called back enough votes to make sure it happened. But Trump to become the only president impeached twice. That's unbelievable. So we're almost taking this for granted. We saw an attack on the Capitol. We saw an impeachment last year, an attack on the Capitol, another impeachment. These are things like we had heard about Nixon. We lived through Clinton a little bit, but these are like once in a lifetime, twice in a lifetime kind of things. We're getting massive, massive events in a very short amount of time. And it's just spectacular to think about. In any event, it's hard. I don't want to keep talking about impeachment, but it's happening now. And, listening to these speeches, there is an argumentative fallacy that we will call whataboutism. And it is basically this idea that, what happened was wrong, but what about Black Lives Matter? Or what about this rally? Or what time you did this thing or this time? And it's basically saying, I don't have an argument that makes sense here. And we heard that time and time again from the speakers today. Not wanting to address what happened and the actual event, and instead saying, yeah, but what about? What about what happened? And you have this tweet this day, and this tweet this day. It's really just a lot of people not knowing what to do. This stuff is happening so quickly. It's hard for me I've been watching it all day. I've been reading about it all day, and it's impossible to make sense of what you must be as a representative who, by the way, was in the Capitol last Wednesday. Their lives were endangered. And 7 days later are voting on this. It's hard to put into any real words. So what I'll do is we'll switch over. I want to talk about the stimulus a little bit. And we'll come back to this as the numbers kind of still come in. 113 people haven't voted. I guess they extend this a little bit. 7 Republicans have voted for impeachment in the House. Wow. Just wow. All right, let's talk about the stimulus. If we go off this a little bit, and we want to be on 3-4 days of I know we're not a talk show. We're on for 5 or 6 hours at a time, but we do want to talk about the stimulus because, Chris Murphy came out today and said, we need $2,000. And I'm all for as much stimulus as you can get. We've had this conversation many, many times that if you've listened to us the last 3-4 months, to me, the last 3 or 4 months, and that is when you put money in the hands of people who don't have much money, it stimulates the economy faster for one main reason. They spend it. And if someone's broke and you give them $10, they will spend that money quickly. And if they are, if they've lost their job, if they're unemployed, getting an extra $300 or $600, that money is going into the system. It's being spent at restaurants, at sandwich shops, at small grocery stores, what have you. And so that serves as a solid stimulus. Then Trump came out and said, I want to give $2,000. And the Democrats said, we'll jump all over that. And they passed a thing in the House to give $2,000. Never went anywhere in the Senate. And Chris Murphy came out and said, well, we desperately need the $2,000 checks to go out. And so here's the problem we have to look at from a historical standpoint, from an effectiveness standpoint. By sending checks to everyone, unemployment's at what, 9-10%? Which means most of the people in the country still have their jobs. So if you send somebody who is a waitress who is out of work $2,000, they're going to spend that money. Even if they're a waitress who still worked part-time or still had some hours, $2,000, they're going to spend that money. That's going to help stimulate the economy. But what happens once you start getting to these $2,000 per person stimulus numbers is, let's look in terms of a family of 4 or 5 with 2 parents, 2 kids, with $140,000 in income. They would all qualify because they're under the 150. But that means that household would get $8,000. They kept their jobs through this. They're not hurting. In fact, they likely have more money on hand because they haven't gone on vacation in a year or two, a year and a half, what have you. They haven't taken flights places. They haven't gone and visited weekend trips or what have you. They haven't played in a lot of school sports and leagues and things of that nature, all these things which take up thousands of dollars. So there are many, many, many of these families who, under a $2,000 stimulus, well, they just got $600, right? So they got $2,400. Well, it's not the end of the world. But once you get to a $2,000 stimulus per person, that's a household that's getting $8,000 to $10,000 that may not have seen a drop in their income. And when you give money to people who have money, who have means, they're not quick to spend that money. Instead, it goes into savings. And that does not serve as a stimulus to the economy. So to the Chris Murphys of the world who are saying, we need to get those $2,000 checks out, we need to stop and say, well, hold on a second. What are we putting in place to make sure that that money goes to people who will actually spend it, who, one, need it, and will actually spend it? To people who have not lost their job, if you're in the construction industry, you did great. A lot of people in the service industry, electricians, plumbers, things of that nature, did phenomenal. Painters, sheetrockers, great. If you're in medicine, you're in healthcare, you got a ton of overtime. So while there are whole industries struggling, people in sales, yeah, they're struggling. People in some marketing or who cater to small business, they're struggling. people in the entertainment industry, movie theaters, stage, regular theaters, what have you, they're all struggling. They're dying for work. But then you have this other group that has done quite well. I'm not talking about, investors. I'm talking about people who go out and work every day, who had an enormous HVAC technicians I know had their best year ever. Carpenters are having their best. Developers. There is a housing shortage. Real estate agents are sometimes setting records at what they're selling. So this next round of stimulus, if we're going to increase that to $2,000, there has to be far more of a caveat involved on who gets it and how much they get. And that's why I far more support increasing the assistance to unemployment as opposed to a $2,000 check. Because a $2,000 check goes to everybody. And a family of four that has maintained their income under $150, but $140,000, that's just the way it is. Victoria, there is a movement on social media that those who are still working and not struggling should donate their stimulus checks to nonprofit organizations. No problem with that. If you have the extra money and you don't need the stimulus, donate it. Great. No problem. However, a small percentage of people are going to do that. Most people are not going to do that. Some will, but it's simply not going to be. Steve said, I think a good way to distribute would be to give to people who collected unemployment. I agree. And I would say this, rather than $2,000, right now you're giving $300 per person for an extra 11 weeks for people on unemployment. What I would say is I would give some money to everyone who's received unemployment, even if they're not receiving it now. So if you got unemployment for 3 months last summer, here's a check for $2,000 because you're likely behind on something. To the people who are on unemployment going forward, I would extend that 11 to probably 20 to 25 weeks, get you to the middle of the summer. And 2, increase it from 3 at least to $600. Makes far more sense. I know the $2,000 checks sound sexy. We're giving more money out to people, but you have far too many people who don't need it. And so the stimulating effect of giving money to people who will spend it quickly is not there. We'll put it this way. There's only so much milk you need. So if a family has $130,000, $140,000 coming in, let's say you're a lawyer, you did okay during the pandemic. You kept most of your stuff. There's trials going on. Your clients are, wealthy. You're a tax attorney or something. And you have 3 kids based on made $135,000, $140,000, and you will get $10,000 in stimulus money. That's crazy. That's nuts. And so while I like these posts and it's nice of Chris Murphy to say we need more stimulus and it's vital, it's not vital for everyone. And I'd rather see those that were desperate for that money have a better. Wow, it's up to 9. We'll go back to the stimulus a second. 9 Republicans have voted for impeachment. And while it's not of great consequence in the House, but it sends a message to the Senate between Mitch McConnell, and I wouldn't want to see who those 9 are, what states they're in, because that will impact other Republicans in that state and the senators in those states that are Republican. That is higher than I thought. 9 Republicans have jumped. And I will say this, many, including people like McCarthy, said today Trump was absolutely responsible for what we saw last Wednesday. He didn't want to vote for impeachment. There's a question on if impeachment will actually pull the country together or not. I don't think it will. More than anything, I think it'll distract from Biden's first few months. If we're still locked in this and you're keeping that discussion going when it may not need to. But there are Democrats who are pushing to make sure this guy never runs again. I want to read some of these comments, though. Victoria, the donation thing, Mary, I agree. It's possible to donate to nonprofits if you can. Listen, you can suggest people donate to nonprofits. You can't mandate it. And so those people probably shouldn't be getting government money if they don't need it. Steve, I think a good way to distribute would be to give people the unemployment. I agree with you. I would increase what people get as part of their unemployment. Some people who may be off unemployment are likely suffering from having been on unemployment, so I would give them something. Michael, question is where to set the limit. I am still working, took a pay cut during the height of the pandemic, but had that restored. So technically I would not need it. One of my relatives is working in education for starvation wages and can definitely use it. So yeah, I don't know what the cutoff should be. That's part of what this discussion has to be. But part of the point is, Chris Murphy posted, I'll actually read his exact post. President-elect Biden is right. We need to pass $2,000 stimulus checks ASAP. Okay, that's a great statement. But we need to qualify that with far more than that. And the question I have, these statements are great because how do we arrive at $2,000? Initially, it was $600. We arrived at by saying we don't want this stimulus bill to go this over $2 trillion or $3 trillion, whatever it was. So let's work backwards to get to 600. Then it was 300 in the last one. Now it's 2,000. Why not 8,000? Like, what is the number, the magic number that is addressing this issue? Or do you just keep passing 900 billion deals, another $300, $300, if we can get out quickly? And so from a political standpoint, from a political propaganda standpoint, we have these statements that are not qualified. We don't know why 2,000 is the magic number. The other side of that is, what are the stipulations that attach to it? We get the $1,200 had to get out the door quickly. Nobody knew how bad this was going to get. Now we have a sense of at least somewhat of an end to this. Another 4, 5, 6 months before we get to that 70, 75% vaccinated rate. What will get us there? How quickly will different industries bounce back? Housing industry, doing great. Medical industry, spectacular. No need for those people to get a check like this. And then we can yell about fairness, but there's no need for it. This is about bailing people out. But you have people in the entertainment industry and people in the restaurant industry who have not paid their rent in 5 or 6 or 7 months. And that will come due at some point. Is there a way to make sure that money is divided more towards people who are in desperate need of it, as opposed to just send out a check to the general population? Still at 9. So 221 for, 192 against. I want to know who the 9 are, what state they're from. So what I'll be looking at later on today, I won't be on camera, but if we'll be looking at is what states are they from and where do the senators from those states stand? So we have at least 2 from Washington. I don't know if the senators are Democrats or Republican or not, so I don't know the answer to that. 1 from Michigan, 1 from Wyoming, I believe 2 from New York, 1 from Illinois. Now, again, just because the state voted Democrat doesn't mean that district voted Democrat. That will have a bigger impact. Now it's 10.
As you can see,
who are the 10?
Voted in favor of impeaching the president of the United States.
It's 225 to 194 as the votes come in.
But 10 Republicans joining the Democrats is very significant.
It is the first bipartisan impeachment of President Trump, though it is the second impeachment.
Yeah, he had no Republicans the first time around. That's pretty impressive. Michael, I like the model Barstool Sports did for their small business support. They provide support in a smaller monthly supplement until the business is back on their feet. I think theoretically that makes sense. And they raised, I think they had a fund, right? The problem is, how do you judge that? And what type of overhead does it take to judge that? So if Barstool raised $50 million to give out, you can have 5 or 6 people analyzing, getting numbers back in, that sort of thing. For a government, when you're giving support for tens of thousands of businesses, do we have the manpower to make the determination what back on their feet is? How do we do that? And so, you're defeating the purpose if you pass a stimulus that needs so much overhead and so many determining factors to make it happen. Now, the PPP helps. Right now, they have to prove they're down 30% to get that next round of PPP. I think you're going to need probably another one of those for some businesses. The question I have is on that $2,000 check. The $2,000 number is out there. How we arrived at that number, I have no idea. It seems like Trump was the reason we arrived at that number, because he threw it out there. Democrats said, let's jump on this. But 1, is that the magic number? Should some people be getting 0 and some people getting 4,000? I would argue yes. To the people who have not been able to pay their rent for 6 months, that's adding up. So being able to give them a check for $2,000 or $4,000 or $6,000 instead of somebody who has not lost their job makes a lot of sense. How do we make that determination? And do we have the personnel in place to help make that determination on a state level or on a national level? We already have I'm just watching this number to see if it goes up. We already have unemployment set up. So if you remember, if you were unemployed when the pandemic started, it took 4 or 5 weeks to get that first unemployment check. If you were self-employed, by the way, self-employed have gotten crushed, especially if you're in sales, just crushed. I know a ton of self-employed people who are destroyed. John, there are folks flat on their backs in long-term care who've gotten $1,200 and $600 checks, could jeopardize their state benefits. Giving them over $2,000 is crazy. Again, let's make sure, Phil. So Phil's kind of making the point that I made earlier. How do we determine if 2,000 or 4,000 or 10,000 or 50,000 is the right number? We're yelling. We desperately need these $2,000 checks, but maybe 800 is the right number. We don't know what the number is. So politically, it's just nonsense. We just yell that out. John, I agree. There are people who are getting these checks, aren't spending them. And if people are not going to spend the money or don't need the money to survive right now, it's not having a stimulating effect to the economy. We need to make sure the money is in the hands of people who will spend it. And we also need to make sure that when this pandemic is over, when those rent delays are no longer there, when the mortgage delays are no longer there, and people are hit with 6, 7, 8 months of back mortgages due, that they have some support. And we don't have a sudden influx of homeless people or thrown out of their apartments because they owe 8, 9 months of rent. And so, yes, in some cases, the $2,000 checks don't make any sense for people who have money. But in some cases, $4,000 or $6,000 checks make a lot of sense. Michael, I'm thinking the stimulus should be limited to those making $50,000 per household or less because they would most likely be in more trouble. There's some logic to that. However, let's suppose you were in a household that, you owned a restaurant. And that income that year was normally was $130,000, $140,000. You did great, and suddenly your income is down to 20. We're going to have a hard time giving out stimulus money based on last year's tax returns, because people haven't filed them yet. So we're still looking at restaurant owners. We're looking at people in the entertainment industry. We're looking at movie theater workers, things of that nature, where the actual money they made last year may not match or be significantly less than what they made the year earlier. There are people who made $150,000 or more, or families that made $150,000 more in 2019, dropped significantly in 2020 and didn't get a stimulus check because we're basing the initial ones on 2019 numbers. Richard, allocate money to each state and have them decide to distribute. Same thing. So the states are complaining that there's not enough money for them, right? State and local money they want from these stimulus deals. It was cut out of the last stimulus package. So when you start saying, let's give this to the states and let them decide, the question becomes, who does that? What staff members do it? And is there enough staff in place to do it? Who pays them? So if it requires you, think of this like the census. Every census, money is set aside by Congress to pay for census workers. If you're suddenly going to have to decide who gets the stimulus money, then you have to pay somebody to analyze that and make that decision. It's a temporary job, but you have to pay people to do that. So part of the stimulus then is not going towards the money that's needed. It goes towards hiring new people for the state for temporary jobs. That's the catch-22. Mary, it's hard to determine household income as a factor, as 50,000 in Connecticut is different than 50,000 in Alabama. Absolutely true. 50,000 in Alabama, you're rich. 50,000 in Connecticut, you are well below the median income. In Branford and on the shoreline of most of our people. Will this be considered income and will it be taxed? The $1,200 initially was not. The unemployment addition was. I'm not sure about 2,000 going forward. We have a lot of questions to answer about what is likely to be proposed by the 21st or 22nd. The question is, if we're giving out $2,000 per person, you're going to have families who, and many, many families who don't need it. They're going to take it. No one's going to say no to a check, but don't need it. In a family of 4 or 5 that has an income of below that 150 threshold, but still a really good income. Remember, the median income in Branford, for example, we're broadcasting from is what, 74, 75,000. So you can be almost double the median income in Branford, have a household of 4 or 5 people, not gone on vacation, not been in sports league, saved a fortune over the last year, and get a check, be in great fiscal shape, but get a check for $8,000 to $10,000 if what Chris Murphy said takes place. Ken, we were able to get by without needing it last time. So when the donation match time came, we donated to several places. Good on you. I mean, congratulations. That's good to hear. I'm glad you did that. But there's no way to mandate that people do that. And so we'd rather, if you were able to get by with it, that's great. But if it was tight, use the money, spend it, eat at local restaurants, support as much local as you possibly can. That makes sense. Or donate it to a nonprofit. Problem is, some will do that. The majority will not. And I think most people, if they get a check like that, they'll just save it. The problem is, that's great. But if you don't need it and you save it, it doesn't serve the purpose of stimulating the economy by getting back into the economy being spent. Remember, a strong economy is based on the movement of money. So think of a circle with 10 millionaires. That circle's worth $10 million. But if nobody's buying anything, if nothing's getting taxed, if there's money is not moving, it's a bad economy. We need an economy where people are spending money. Think about after 9/11. What did Bush say? Go to New York, spend money, go out to eat. Because having money in your pocket makes you feel better and secure, but it doesn't create a strong economy. A strong economy, if you learn nothing from this podcast today, is based on the movement of money. The more people are buying, the more people are selling, the more the GDP increases. That's a strong economy. And so to stimulate that, we need to make sure people who are actually going to spend money have money in their pocket. Okay, this looks like the final number, 231 to 197. 10 Republicans voted for impeachment. And I think that is just spectacular from a political standpoint. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just saying from a political standpoint, it's a spectacular number. You have a bipartisan impeachment now. And that will open the door, in my opinion, between Mitch McConnell so far and seeing 10 Republicans vote for this. That will open the door for more senators. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens on the Senate floor and when that vote takes place. Just amazing, historical day. And I just unreal. Hopefully the money is spent to small business, not Amazon. 4 Republicans, no vote. 1 Democrat, no vote. Yes, I see that now. Okay. Is that, do they vote? How does that work? Is that no vote? Is they're not there? I don't know the answer to that question. I'll have to look that up. Wow. An amazing day. It's just, I don't have, I remember being in school talking about what it must have been like watching Nixon. At some point, we'll have some people on talking about that, watching the whole Nixon thing play out. And I saw Clinton. I was a little young for Clinton to really understand it. And I was a Jehovah's Witness who were not involved politically, so I wasn't really paying attention. But this is spectacular. Just from a pure, governmental curiosity standpoint, it's just spectacular to see. Now, Trump did come out today. I'll read this and make a statement. Statement from the president made this afternoon. It says, in light of reports of more demonstrations, I urge that there must be no violence, no law breaking, and no vandalism of any kind. This is not what I stand for, and is not what America stands for. I call on all Americans to help ease tensions and calm tempers. Thank you. It is 4:34 now. I think he put this out around 1 or 2 o'clock this afternoon. And that is exactly 7 days too late. Because 7 days ago, I was on camera with Sean Scanlon and Christine Cohen talking about one of the darkest moments in American history. And Trump, at that point, was silent. And before we get into the he's to blame, he's not to blame thing, you have hardcore Trump supporters come out today and say he is absolutely to blame, including Kevin McCarthy. Mitch McConnell, who has bailed him out over and over and over and over again, just disgusted with him. It's hard to put into words what we witnessed last week, and this statement just falls on really, really hollow ears. We'll see what happens. Just amazing. All right, we are it's 4:35. I didn't realize that. Sorry about that. Went a little long today. But a spectacular day, an unbelievable day. They're about to announce that there's enough votes to impeach. Well, we'll be live tomorrow. I don't have words for this anymore. This is just amazing. I don't know if it's just a stunning day to be an American or a sad day to be an American or what. I don't. You ever have one of those moments where you don't know how to react to something? It's just surreal. Like, holy cow. I'll try to put this in a little more perspective tomorrow when I have 24 hours to think about this, but I don't know. All right, I'm going to go off now. We'll be back on tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Michael, I just hope all those arrested are punished under Trump's executive order mandating severe punishment for destruction of federal property. The irony would be wonderful.
Consider is laid upon the table. Okay.
All right,
President
so
Trump.
Speaker Pelosi has just gavelled the vote down, and the motion has passed. President Trump becomes the first president in the history of this republic to be impeached twice. This follows, of course, his incitement of a mob that committed a terrorist attack and attempted to stop it.
President of the United States impeached twice. Holy fuck. This is supposed to be the quiet time. This is supposed to be the time when a new president's elected and the two presidents meet, and there's pictures of, Trump went to see Obama and Obama went to see Bush, and Bush, this is normal. Can you imagine, the president leaves a letter for the new president, right? There's always some words of encouragement for a new president. We should do like a contest on Branford 7 and let people post what they think Trump will write in a goodbye or whatever letter to the new guy. It's always, this is a tough position to be in. A lot of pressure's on you. I wish you well. I'm rooting for you. Something along those lines. I remember I saw the letter Bill Clinton got from George Bush the first, and it was really heartwarming. And these are great letters, and they understood the magnitude of that seat, what they represented. We should do that. What would Trump's letter to Biden look like when Biden walks into that Oval Office for the first time? I don't know. He's not even going to the inauguration. I mean, how do you have such disdain for the country you ran to run? How is that possible? Such disdain for the election process, such disdain for the transfer of power. You're not even going to you reached the pinnacle, the most powerful man on the planet. And your ego still isn't satisfied. How is that humanly possible? How is it possible? You have reached the single greatest thing you could possibly. If I became president, there's nothing else to reach. There's nowhere else to go. You were the president of the United States, whether it's 4 years or 8 years, there's nowhere else to go. I don't know. Trump's letter to Biden, F you, I won. It may be. That's going to be an interesting discussion. I may start the discussion on Branford 7 tonight and see what some people think it may be. I'm guessing it'll be ugly. I always had hope. Even after he took the oath of office, I said, all right, maybe it's time. Maybe he'll be presidential. Maybe he'll listen to his son-in-law, or maybe he'll listen to smarter people, or listen to, he put some people around him that were his supporters, but also some people who had experience and people in the military who had experience. And there was a thought, maybe he'll start acting presidential. And then he took to Twitter and he didn't stop. And he kept going and kept going and kept going. He had names for everybody and just insulted everybody over and over and over again. And I'm not sitting here saying he didn't do anything good. I'm not saying he was all evil and all that kind of stuff. I'm just saying, why did he have to do it constantly? And then you had an opportunity. The election's over. You ran a tough race. By the way, he cost himself the election. That first debate in early voting destroyed him. That's on him. He acted like a 3-year-old in that debate. He still had a chance to be presidential. He still had a chance after this to say, you know what? We had 4 years. We built some of the wall, and we fought back against immigration. And whatever he wants to say were good things to his supporters. And it just got worse and worse and worse and worse these last 2 months. And it has to end with 5 people dead in our capital. An attack on our capital. and still hearing from him. Do I think Trump will leave the White House on his own? I think he'd be far too proud not to. I think he'll be out of the White House by the morning of the 20th, if not the 19th. God help us if we're attacked or something happens the night of the 19th or the 20th. I know what, Mary, I know you just said you give him too much credit to be a grown-up. I think it was just hope. It wasn't based on anything significant. It was just based on hope. Sometimes you think the gravity of the office just hits you. And it's almost greater than the political rhetoric of the yelling and screaming we see all the time. You think, I know if I was through an ugly election period and I was elected president and I walked into that Oval Office, I think the weight of every single person that came before me in that office and that at that desk, the weight of the whole entire world watching you in some way, shape, or form for direction. You're going to set the tenor for international relations for the next 4 years. The weight of that would just hit you. I know it would hit me. And I just kind of hoped. I hoped wrong. What can you say? Impeached twice. Holy cow. Guys, I'm just rambling here because I'm just, you knew it was coming, but it just hits you hard. It's just, wow. The last week, an attack on our Capitol, 5 people dead, another impeachment in a week. In a week. And if you're a foreign nation right now, what are you thinking? Here's the 10. Cheney, Jamie Herrera Butler, Katko, Kinzinger, Upton. Fred Upton added, okay. David, I knew that one. Tom Rice. Where's Tom Rice from? I don't have him listed. Peter Meijer, Anthony Gonzalez, and Dan Newhouse. I want to look up tomorrow. We'll talk about what states they're from and what potential impact they can have. I want to look at the senators from those states, whether they're blue or red states, and if those senators can take this vote and potentially impact. I think he has to get to 67 in the Senate. I'll confirm that, but just wild. Guys, thanks for joining me today. There's days that I'm happy and there's days that I'm down. This is just one of those days where you're just kind of like, what the, really? Did it have to come to this? But I think it did. So have a great night. Just have a great night. I'll see you tomorrow. Talk to you soon. Yeah, thank you, Richard, 67. Have a great night, guys.